Okay. Welcome, everybody. Cora, why don't you start?
Hi, everybody. My name is Cora Pluta. I am a parent at Wayne Elementary School in Radnor Township School District. My kids are rising fourth grader, rising second grader, and rising kindergartner. It's very exciting. This coming year, all three children will be at the same school. We're so excited to have everybody join this second mainline Wait Until 8th community webinar. Um, you can always find out more about us on our Facebook group and inside of the WhatsApp group. Those are great places to meet other people who are interested in this work. And Yair, if you don't mind introducing Aviva.
Okay, so welcome, everybody, and thank you again for joining us. And just to kind of, mention, add to what Cora was saying, we're a group of parents in the main line, and actually there's, it's expanding and more people are reaching out to us and want to join our groups, our Facebook groups and what we do. And, we believe that we need to learn about smartphones, about social media, but also the potential impact on the children and the families. And I think that the most important thing that the whole concept behind what we're doing is two principles. The first one, we are not anti-technology. As you're going to see, for example, Aviva is very pro and very involved in technology. I'm also doing consulting for AI companies, etc. And the second concept, which is probably more important, is that we want to have a non-judgment environment. Basically, in the same way that we and everybody should accept people, whatever their choice is, to have a cell phone or a smartphone at a young age, fourth grade, eighth grade, and that's fine. Everybody does whatever is right for them, for their families, and for their children. But also, we want to create some sort of a critical mass that when our kids go to fifth grade or seventh grade, there will be enough kids to feel comfortable not to give in the child the smartphone. So this is kind of some of the things that we're talking about. And in this webinar series, we're inviting different people, psychologists, teachers, experts, to talk about the technology and children and what they think. It's just insights. So with that, Aviva, or Dr. Aviva Legat, she's the founder of Ivy Insight, which is a premier college admission consultancy, and also Ed Generative, which is a pioneering advisory platform that is helping schools and universities navigate the opportunities and challenges of AI, artificial intelligence. She also writes, she's a Forbes columnist whose work focuses on the intersection between education, leadership, technology, and she wrote a lot about neurodiversity and digital well-being, including in Fast Company and Business Insider. So, she's very respected in the community. And beyond the professional expertise, Dr. Legat brings the perspective of a mainline parent herself. She lives in the neighborhood here. She's raising a child with special needs, and her insights are grounded in research and in real-life experience, making her, all of this really a especially powerful voice in the conversation. So, Aviva, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Yair. And I guess I'll just start out by, sharing what I shared with you when we first talked, as a way to just underscore how important this Wait Before 8th initiative is. So as Yair said, I had background in college admissions, higher education. That's where I have my main educational and professional experiences. And I've been advising kids for about a decade. And this is the decade when smartphones really became more popular with students and families. And I noticed a shift in my clients' behavior, both the students and the parents, over the last 10 years. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that to set the stage for today's discussion. So what the norm when I first started this work is, let's say we have a student and a parent. The kid wants to go to college. They might have some goals with colleges they want to go to. I'll have a couple calls with the student and the parent. Then the parent kind of steps aside, allows me to work with the student. I give the students assignments. They come back, they complete them. Maybe not fully, but they do they do something on them. And we have I say a good exchange, and there's some autonomy that I'm able to provide them, and independence and trust that they get the work done. Fast forward to closer to the present, that behavior among students and parents has shifted. So the change I've seen in the students over the last 10 years is that they need a lot more hand holding. So, for example, in my practice, I added executive function coaching, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically helping people with time and priority management and sort of holding their hand and body. There's a term called body doubling, which is essentially sitting with them while they complete their work so that they can get it done. So contrast that with when I started, when I could give a student assignment, they would complete it and they got it done for the most part, versus today where I'm not saying this is everybody, but a good portion of the students really need a lot of hand holding to actually get the work done, and to be trusted to complete it. Also noticed the behavior change with the parents. So with the parents, when I first started in this line of work, they just said, okay, go work with my student. And then of course, we come in for, different checkpoints and questions. But there was, maybe the helicopter parent, but now I would say parents have transitioned into the pilot instead of the helicopter parent hovering. They're actually the pilot of the plane driving the plane forward. And I think this change in behavior is really driven by the technological shift that our whole society has had, that we are living a lot of our lives through our phones. Parents are understandably anxious about what their kids are accessing online. They're monitoring them, surveilling them, and that in and of itself, that act of surveilling them and not giving them that freedom is creating more anxiety. And so they're doing more for their student, and the students aren't developing that self-efficacy. And I think likewise, the students aren't developing that level of confidence and autonomy and ability to execute in the way that they did 10 years ago. Again, I'm not going to say every single student, but when I have asked students if they have social media or not, I can usually tell, because the ones who don't have social media tend to be more mature, able to handle demands of the work. The college admissions process is obviously a very stressful time, so people are not always at their best. But the students, I would say, who are more capable of handling the stress more autonomously are those who don't have social media. Again, this is my anecdotal pool, which is not the whole main line. But I think that my experience is very valuable in that I have this unique vantage point of this transitional moment that we've experienced in our society, and working with kids and teens in this age, and having to change my services to be able to really meet the needs of the families is just it's surprising, right? So I wanted to share that as sort of a way to set the stage. And then I also wanted to give some context for the work that I'm doing now. So I'm continuing to help students and families through this process and advising them. And as I was advising them, I noticed that as AI became introduced, it was kind of an accessibility tool for a lot of students. And as I mentioned, a lot of them are struggling with executive function. A lot of them are struggling with emotion regulation, time management. And AI is a really great tool for helping that. So I started incorporating AI into my practice over the last couple of years. I wrote about that in Business Insider about how it's really a tool to help reduce burnout. So I do think I am a believer in technology. I do think it has a place, but I think we didn't know what we didn't know, and parents had the phones and kind of didn't really know what to do or how to set structures, right, that would support their students to develop in a way that would allow them to have the level of maturity that makes them college ready, like not just from an academic standpoint, but also from a social emotional standpoint. Of course, couple that with the pandemic, and you don't have you have a recipe for a lot of challenges. But I really think it started before the pandemic, with the introduction of phones. So back to what I'm doing now. So with seeing AI's potential, I got really interested in, how do you build with AI? How does AI work? How do you connect different things together? So I've been building an AI. I have a custom GPT for college admissions. I'm happy to pass along the link to anybody who wants to try it out. But basically, I realized I could sort of scale my expertise. And so I'm working on an AI solution now to scale the college admissions piece. And I also recognize that not everybody has had access to the level of AI knowledge that I've been able to acquire. And colleges and universities, particularly, which has been my main my main thing, they are very behind in terms of the AI adoption, and they are the ones that are tasked with getting our children eventually workforce ready, right? And so our kids need to eventually, I mean, if we have young kids, we don't necessarily have to worry about this too much, but eventually our kids are all going to have to learn how to use AI, figure out how they fit in this world that is so AI centric. And so I'm really excited to be helping some universities now with figuring out their AI adoption strategy and just bringing them to the table to have conversations about how they can incorporate AI, how they can put it into their mission. So I just wanted to give a little context for my trajectory and encourage you, if you're interested in the topic of AI, to read my Forbes column. I write regularly about how college planning is changing in light of AI. And I also, as I said, write about that in Business Insider. So that's just a little bit background to give context for the conversation.
This is really interesting, and it sounds like you're not at all an anti-technology. You're a leader in technology, and you're incorporating it in your life and everything that you do. But I want to learn more, because when we spoke, you were working mostly with teenagers and their parents on your main work, helping them with college admissions and getting to know them, and it's kind of a process. But a lot of us, like, I don't have kids and I have kids who are young, first grade, etc. And I don't know exactly how teens are, but try to maybe explain a little bit more. You mentioned that you kind of, like, when you start talking to the child or maybe even the family, you get a sense of who has already social media and who doesn't. Maybe you can give a little more examples. And also I want to know from your experience, I don't know how many families you have or children, is it dozens or hundreds, but do you think that the vast majority of children who are currently in high school already have like full access to social media, or some of them, still wait?
Yeah, that's a great question. So social media, in terms of what the behaviors are, I would say one of the behaviors I noticed is a huge, I mean, this whole book about it, anxious generation. Anxiety is the number one symptom of overuse of social media. And that shows up in a number of ways. One, it shows up in their ability to communicate with adults such as myself or their parents even, right? They have trouble articulating their ideas. They have trouble forming their ideas. They also have trouble trying new things. So a lot of the times it's encouraging people to get to the starting point so that they can know what they're interested in. So a lot of what we do on the earlier stages of working with families is getting them to the table of, this is what I want to explore so that I can be more confident in my interests. So I would say those are the main ways that it's showing up, is, in communication, interpersonal communication, in ability to self-reflect and articulate, and then also to try new things. In terms of, people how much access they have, I can't say I did any formal surveys on that, other than I just informally ask people if they're on it or not, when I'm working with them. And, as far as people who don't have access to it, I would say they're just more confident and they're more independent than the people. And I think that's because they have less anxiety.
Um, I had the same question. Excuse me. When you were talking about you could tell who has social media and who doesn't, I was like, wait, there are some kids who don't have social media? Wow. um, and I'm interested to know, do you work, I would like to hear exactly the ages of the kids who you work with in your business,
Mhm.
and comparing that to how old your own children are, and where the gap is there, I assume that there's like a gap in age there, like you have your own kids, you have the kids you work with, and then I think it's middle school probably where you are not currently interacting with kids.
Right, right. My mind's a blank slate about middle
So,
school. I can tell you about elementary school and preschool and high school, but middle school years are definitely a blank slate. And so I have been surprised to hear, and again, like, no judgment at all, but I've been surprised to hear that kids in our elementary school, even my son's age, my son is a first grader, going to be rising second grader, that they have phones. I was like, really? Just because I just didn't think a kid that age would need a phone. I'm thinking like a high school kid, I understand why they could need a phone, like if they have to take an Uber, or they have to get directions to some place they're on their own. Like I understand that, but I was a little bit surprised. But, with my own, children, I've sort of changed my own thinking about technology based on my experiences and how they've developed, as well as, observing things in my work. So, as Yair said, I have a son with special needs. And when he was first diagnosed, he really didn't have, many communication skills or self-regulation skills. He was, melting down a lot. And we were having a lot of trouble interacting with him. And, with the pandemic, we really used like the tablets as like a coping device, like for us, because we were just like, what do we do with this kid who, can interact? This is like a regulating force for him in a lot of ways, to just like have something that, like, okay, this is like a comforting video, or like this is a comforting game, and like he can do that. And then as he gained more functionality and developed more skills, we realized, like, wait, we actually don't need this as much, or we don't need to rely on this as much, and it's actually better if we pull back. So again, I'm not anti-technology. I may have overused it, admittedly, when, we, first gave him an iPad, but, I think we've sort of come to a better way of having it around and in the house. And we've gotten rid of YouTube. Is very addicting, which what is what I learned. So we got rid of YouTube. Our whole home is YouTube free. You can, if you want to know how to do this, you can put this in your router. You can block YouTube and all of the subdomains. You can ask AI, like, what are all the subdomains to block YouTube? And it's out of the house. It's never coming back, because that is a very addicting app. And I noticed when we got rid of YouTube, that was actually a really good thing. I didn't realize that YouTube was, I just didn't think about it, because I'm like, well, it's not social media, but actually apparently it is. In Australia, they actually banned YouTube for under, I think under 15, you can't get on YouTube anymore, because YouTube is considered social media. So, that was just my experience. I think I made a little bit of a mistake there as a parent. I think we all make bad choices sometimes, but I feel like, I came to it, and no judgment if you still have YouTube, but that was just my experience, that for my kids, it was just like too much stimulation for them.
So, can I ask a little bit more detail about these high schoolers? Because I don't have a high schooler and I don't work with high schoolers.
Of course, yeah.
So,
Oh,
It was amazing timing. As she
it
was,
was a great question too.
I'll take the next question until she logs back in on her cell phone or the computer. I'm actually curious. I know that she wants to talk more about the high schoolers, but I am curious because, let me finish that question and then Cora will jump in. But I'm more curious about what you had to say about, neurodiverse children. My wife works with neurodiverse, not only, but mostly with a lot of neurodiverse children. That's kind of like her forte, or things that she's really interested in. And she's very close to Brooke, who owns the Get Cafe, and, who basically hires most of the people who there are with special needs. And so we're very close to the neurodiverse families or children. What are your thoughts? I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about smartphones, children, social media, etc., and neurodiverse. What do you have any thoughts that you would like to share?
Right. Absolutely. So I think I've sort of like maybe touched around this topic, but I think that like technology and any kind of specific norms around them have to be a bit flexible for people with special needs, because people with special needs have different needs for self-regulation. As I mentioned with AI, I really feel like it's an accessibility tool for people, especially with ADHD, but also possibly people on the spectrum. I would say specifically for people with ADHD, because you can like really dive into a topic and be self-directed in your learning. So I think that, use of technology is actually very positive. And I think even though, I got down on myself a little bit for letting my kid watch, his iPad too much when he was first diagnosed, like, we also as parents had to live our lives too, like, and if this was something that was calming him down, then, is it really all bad? So I think that, I don't have all the answers, but I think that every family has to really look at like what's going to be helpful for their children and what's not helpful, what might be overstimulate. And I always think with neurodivergent kids, there's always like a fine line between being like regulated and overstimulated, because for neurodivergent kids, they're very sensitive, and it could be just like, watching a little bit too much. Maybe watching for 20 minutes was a good idea, but maybe watching for like 45 minutes, push them into like a dopamine rush or something, and then they're melting down, right? So every person is different. So I can't, give a blanket statement about like what is the right amount of time to put your kid on an iPad or on a phone or anything. But I would just say that it's really important to monitor, what your kids are accessing, as well as how much time they're accessing it and the impact on their behavior after they're not accessing it. So are they like craving it? Are they just like, it's there, like I'll pick it up? Or what is their relationship to it? And then, I would experiment with, boundaries around it. So for us, what we're moving towards now, haven't gotten there yet, is just like having it in the car instead of having it in the house and the car, just to just sort of like keep trying to like wean off a little bit at a time with technology. Because I do think it's, like I said, it's helpful, but it can be, I think, a fine line between helpful and like addicting. And it's, as a parent, it's really hard to draw that line, especially when you have a neurodivergent kid who like already got super overstimulated at school, just wants to like veg out and not think about anything. It's like, do you really like want to deny them access and, have them bouncing off the walls or whatever? So it's really hard. And I don't think there's any black or white about it. And I think that neurodivergent parents are often judged for their children's behavior, and it's not fair, but they are. And I think that we should think about what's best for our children and their needs, and not worry about what other people think if we're giving our kids too much time or not enough time or what have you. Looking at how much this is an accessibility tool, how much is this a regulation tool for them, how much are they more engaged with it? Like, I know my son, like, he'll engage more with reading if it's on the iPad than if it's a book, because that works better for him. So it's really hard to make a blanket statement around it, but that was my overall thinking on it.
I'm sorry that I disappeared. I'm back. I was going to ask you about high school students.
Mhm.
I was so interested to hear that for you, separating YouTube out of your house was really helpful. And I'm wondering if you have noticed, like, which apps seem to be ones that really invade the teenagers' thoughts and make your work with them more difficult? Like social media, but is it TikTok? Is it Instagram? Is it Facebook? Is it? And also, so that was the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question is, you were talking about how what you're seeing is that children seem to be less independent, that the parents are actually the pilot now, not just helicoptering, but actually just like doing the stuff for the kids. At the same time, we all have to be careful monitoring what the kids are doing online. So I'm wondering, are there families where you see the balance working out really well? Like, are there families we can emulate, or how do you imagine it might look for you going forward based on what you've learned?
I think based on what I know, like, absolutely no social media until they're at least 16, possibly even 18. Because I think social media is a larger issue than phones, because of that like connection. And I would also include social media, not TikTok and Instagram are the obvious ones, but there are also a lot of dangers. Unfortunately, never happened upon them from my own kids, but I follow other groups because I'm just interested in technology. But there are lots of things that are hiding in games. So any video game where there's an interactive component with other users, my understanding is there are a lot of predators that could be lurking in these games and sharing inappropriate images with or videos with kids. And so one of the big issues is that a lot of young kids are getting exposed to inappropriate, explicit content at a really young age. And so any, games that are on their devices, really need to, I would say not be interactive, ideally. Or my brother-in-law is really like a real techie. He has a PhD in engineering, and he set up like a private server for one of the games, so that, his son wasn't interacting. But I would say a big issue with the boys that I've seen, not every boy, but it's a big enough trend for me to call it out, would be video game addiction. So I'd say women tend to suffer more with the social media comparison, and the men tend to suffer more with the video game addiction. And the lack of reality that both of those things present, I think, is really not worth giving them access to. At least that's how I will handle it. I know different kids may be different. If my kids are anything like me, I'm sure they're going to be pretty sensitive to that kind of stuff. So I'm going to hold off on social media as long as possible, for my own kids, and also just be very careful about video games. And unfortunately, I did have a student that I worked with a couple years ago that was almost kidnapped because she connected with somebody, like she met somebody through a conference, and then they connected her with somebody else. Turns out this person was like a groomer predator. She almost left her family to go live with this person. And thankfully they caught it before, she actually did it. But they're finding people on Discord. So this is another one I wouldn't let your kids do, because these like messages disappear, so we can't track them. So whatever you do with your devices, as much as you can keep them locked down, do that. I have heard so many stories of parents that, not necessarily my parents, but the parents that I see on these groups that talk about technology, that they do all the things to lock down the devices, but still somehow the kid is able to like overtake the access. Like they're very smart, and they find a way. Like when there's a will, there's a way. Maybe they use a VPN or something. So yeah, I think that, like I said, waiting till waiting till at least 8th is great to get a phone, and then ideally not having social media, and you can at least use your router to block all these sites from the house, if you if you at least they don't have to be on it in the house if they happen to join it out of your site, not in the house, I would say.
Follow-up question to that, Aviva, is that Dr. Beth, for example, was in the first webinar. She came and her son actually popped up and he joined as well. And he's now, he just finished college, but Dr. Beth decided not to give her kids a cell phone until, I don't think they got social media at all until they were 18 or so. And they were actually okay with it, because the way that she described it, some families, it's not like my child is 7 years old and she's like, iPad TV, like she doesn't have any consciousness to recognize anything. She's like, TV, give me Bluey, give me whatever. And, honestly, I'm the same. I have my cell phone and sometimes I just want to go to bed and chill. And before I go to bed, let me just look at Facebook. And then somehow a reel, and because it targets exactly my brain and knows exactly what I like, it's like, oh, this is nice. And then let me just one more. And it's like, oh, this is cool. So it knows exactly my taste better than what I do. So I can only imagine what kids. But does it happen sometimes that teenagers are actually recognizing, maybe with the support of their mother or other people, is like, or their parents, that they may not be ready, and they just, they actually acknowledge that they are not ready for social media? Or is it too addictive and it just gets to everybody if they have that option, from your experience?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm not in those conversations, but my feeling about it is that, maybe if they have a phone, the parents either are just like saying it's fine, or they're just signing up for it and the parents don't know. I don't think there's a lot of discussion about these things. So I think talking to kids about social media and phone use is important, just to keep the conversations going. And I'm imagining some teenagers don't want to talk to their parents about what they're doing, right? So I think that's why I think, trying to have the conversation at least is helpful. And then if you can put some guardrails in your home for any things that are not great. It's just really hard to do that, because apparently there's stuff hidden everywhere. Like I learned recently, I think it was like Spotify, there's stuff, Apple Music, there's stuff, there's just stuff. When I say stuff, I mean explicit stuff lurking in like every corner of the internet. So if you have an internet connected device, like chances are your kid could happen upon something that, you really wouldn't want them to see. Whether they mean to access it or not, or, they have a friend, they're like, oh, look at this, and then, then they see something. So it's really hard because we can't completely like, bubble wrap our kids and tell them like not to have friends and not to have look at their friends' phones, but at least we can control if they get device, when they get the device, and what goes on that to an extent, right? Like it could be harsh and be conditional also about what's on there. So
I'm interested to hear more about the high schoolers. Are there any who you work with who don't have smartphones?
I would say they all have smartphones, but they don't all have social media. They all text. I have never worked with a student that I know of who has a flip phone, at least not in the modern day. But I think it's a great idea, and I have heard of some people just like enjoying going back that way. I know there's a whole company that makes like dumb phones that actually looks cool. I actually considered getting one, but then I realized it wasn't very practical for my purposes. But
so if they have a smartphone, are the smartphones then not, like, how does this work? Are they not connected to the internet? If you have a smartphone, you don't have social media? I can't even conceive of the thing. How do you have the smartphone without social media? What do they have on their phones? What are they doing?
Exactly. They just text. They just text with their friends. They don't Snapchat them. They don't, DM them on Instagram. They're not watching TikTok videos. So they're just texting. That's it. That's how they're communicating with their friends. But yeah, I mean, I've seen this around here in Lower Merion. Like, have you ever seen a group of high school kids on the playground? They're just like sitting on their phones in a circle and not talking. Like, I don't want that for my kids. Like, I want them to talk. Like, that's how they're going to develop social skills and confidence and like real connections with other people. And I think the social media is just preventing that for a lot of people.
Somebody in the Q&A was asking about resources for talking to kids about social media and its dangers. So I just want to say that we talked about this in the Facebook group a little bit, but Aviva, I don't know if you might be able to speak to that at all too. Like, do you know where parents are going, the parents who have kids who are working with you?
That's a great question. I mean, I know Common Sense Media has a lot of different resources on their website, so there might be some toolkits on there that can be used. There's this group, Facebook group, that if you're like got kind of anxious about what I said about all the explicit content everywhere, it's called Parenting in a Tech World. It's just a universal group that anybody can be part of. And that's where I learn about all the places where explicit content is lurking. And there are so many parents out there that say like, oh, I tried to do everything right, but my kid was able to access something. So if you ever want to be discouraged from actually giving your kid a phone, like that's a good place to go. But yeah, I would say I think that's a good place. And if you have stories, you can use the story I shared if you want about, someone who, got solicited and almost kidnapped through social media. There are so many stories out there, unfortunately, about this. So I guess it depends on what tactics will work with your child as far as like what would help to encourage them or motivate them to not get on it or to just be responsible in their use. But it's so hard as a parent. Like I'm sure if once my kids ask me, it's going to be hard. Easy to say I'm not going to put them on social media when they're 7, but if they're going to come begging me at 15, like I'm sure it's going to be hard to say no at that point because they're like, almost adults.
So I will say, sorry, I just wanted to jump in and say that I spoke with someone recently who has a rising 8th grader and a rising 6th grader. And she said already it's so much easier with her rising 6th grader because there are already a crew of parents who have signed the Wait Until 8th pledge. And she already has people to share this experience with, whereas her rising 8th grader didn't have that. So thank goodness for this.
That's so good to hear.
Aviva, you mentioned that most of the kids that you work with, or maybe all of them, the teenagers that you're getting to know them and the families, they have smartphones, but some of them don't have social media. And the question that I have is, because it's very clear that the vast majority, probably way over 90% of the kids, the teenagers, like, 16, 17 years old, the kids all have it, or most of the kids have it. How do you, or what would be your advice for a parent or for a child who doesn't have social media, but like you said, all the kids in the recess or in the park later on, they all, instead of talking to each other, they're all on their cell phone, on their smart, whatever, the Snapchat or all these, Facebook or whatever, the YouTubes. What would a kid, or what should a kid do that doesn't have social media until, at the end of high school, where they're basically alone? Like they maybe can text, but if you have the Snapchats and all these crazy platforms, most of the teenagers will probably choose to do the cool stuff and not the regular boring text messages. So how can regular kids meaning that they're not getting social media, can thrive and connect to others and, not be lonely and isolated?
Well, I think that's a great question. And it's like, I think it's got like a very obvious answer, common sense answer to me, which is, they just have to get involved in fun activities. Like the students I'm thinking of, one of them was, on the gymnastics team, and, she started a nonprofit. I mean, all the time that people spend on technology, like they could be out there like changing the world and doing fun things. Another kid I'm thinking about, like he was a volunteer firefighter and he worked on his parents' farm, and they're out there living life and connecting with people, but just, offline instead of online. So I would encourage, parents to just keep their kids really busy with good things, like, not over busy for the sake of filling the schedule, but just expose them to different activities that require them to be in person, whether it's theater or sports, a hobby like chess, like something that requires them to like go to a location, talk with people, be with people, and interact. There's so many ways that, so many opportunities on the main line to do that. And after school things, there's no reason why people should be sitting around on their phones when they can be, doing something good in the world and enjoying a community.
I'm interested in learning a little bit more about that from your experience working with these bigger kids. Like which scenes are the ones where all the kids are not on social media? Like, is it at the sports teams? Like, where can we encourage our children to have interest? There are certain places where they might not naturally be drawn, but we have learned that the community there is super supportive of keeping kids off phones. And so we can like start trying to make friends in that area. Do you know if like, can you give some insight into like, these spaces are super social media-y and these spaces are less?
I would love to have that advice, but I don't. I think it's a very individualized decision. I think that anyone who's sending their kid to, an after school martial arts program, or again, like a theater program, that was my thing as growing up and in school. Anybody who's sending their kid to participate in something, it's assumed that like maybe you'll check your email or something when you're there, but you're there to interact, to build the thing, to rehearse the show, to, practice the sport. You're not there to socialize. So even if all those other people on social media afterwards, so what? Like you got to interact with them there. Maybe you text with them later, and like, I mean, that's honestly enough, right? Like in terms of that social piece, what are they really getting out of these interactions anyway? I mean, think about like, I like texting people too. And, yesterday I was feeling a little bit unproductive. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to text some people. I'm like, it was nice, but it would have been a lot more fun to like have a coffee with one of them, or, have a phone call. We just, as, as a society, we text, right? So I think those in-person experiences just can't be replicated through the phone. So I think it's like, don't even worry about it. I mean, I know easier said than done because there's a lot of social pressure and some people feel more social pressure than others. But if the kids are staying busy, they're developing interest, they're developing confidence, they're finding things that they really like to do and they're learning about themselves, then it's like, who cares,
Yeah, it's finding the spark, the thing that sparks your child up and trying to make space for them to be able to do that.
Exactly.
With other
Go ahead.
Yes, I would say exactly. And a lot of what I do in my company is I do this testing called the Highlands Ability Battery, and it's good for, kids ages 15 and up. And it helps people understand what their natural talents are and what they'll be good at. So for people who I haven't are too afraid to try something new, I can give them kind of feedback on like, well, here's what to try, here's what you're going to be really good at. And but you don't necessarily have to take a test. You could just do things by trial and error too. And I think sometimes parents and students are like too afraid to try new things, but I think like by doing that stuff, you kind of get desensitized to that step of like, oh, well, what if it doesn't, what if it doesn't work? And look, believe me, I experience this all the time because, my son has special needs and he cannot participate in every single activity that other kids can. Like, I'm not going to put him in soccer, or baseball or anything like that. I have to be very careful about what activities I put him in. But when he gets older, he will be in more activities. I just need to make sure that he resonates with that activity before I put him in. I'm not just going to stick him in some like, not that there's anything wrong with the after school program, but it just wouldn't be exactly right for him. So just find those things that your kid is interested in, get them exposed to that as early as you can. And then, let them make friends and find themselves in that way.
I'll take before I take the next question of Lena Davis, just to comment on what you said about the text, that sometimes this is kind of becoming the natural way. And I also, I'm active in a lot of different stuff. So I'm pretty active on my, modality usually is WhatsApp on groups. And I think, even though maybe my wife doesn't agree, that I'm relatively mature and then my brain is not like childish. And yet, when I'm exposed, when you're debating or discussing and something emotional comes up on text, you so frequently misinterpret. I can't tell you how many, and I'm sure that you see this as well. Everybody misinterprets everybody because when I'm talking to you in person or a Zoom or whatever, you see my facial expressions, you hear my tone. And on text, it's bland. It's like a robot. It's binary, 0 or 1. And I can only imagine that if you're a child, 16 years old, emotionally undeveloped, hormones, all of that, and you're exposed to the text and that's how you communicate, that could be very difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that the nuance of the tone is hard. And I think that's a lot of why students struggle to express themselves verbally because a lot of their conversations are taking place on the keyboard instead of, kind of face to face. As, think about it, they're in class, they're listening to the teacher, and then they're going home and getting on their phones unless they have some after school activities in there and they're busy, but otherwise they're not really practicing those skills of interaction in the way that, us, the parents here have.
You said in the beginning of the conversation, and I think you also told me once that you have noticed that kids who are a lot on smartphones or social media, you have noticed that their vocabulary and their ability or inability to express themselves eloquently with, a large vocabulary is very limited. And so maybe you can expand, because I think that it's really an important issue. I mean, we are humans. That's what our strength is to communicate with words with each other. Maybe you can expand a little bit about what you've noticed now versus kids who were not exposed to social media maybe 10 years ago.
Right. And I think it's hard for me to judge if it's or assess if it's a reflective thinking issue, an anxiety issue, or just simply they have fewer words to use. Probably a combination of both, because if they're kind of in their phones too much, they're, feeding off of that energy. And then they're also not getting practice with communicating. So then they're not, you know, presenting themselves or presenting their ideas or used to doing that. So I think it's probably a combination of those two things that's difficult. And then when they go to write, it's like pulling teeth sometimes to get them to come out with a full sentence that sounds good. I mean, eventually it all works out. We help them out, we get them through. But again, this was not the case 10, 11 years ago when I started my business. I could say, hey, write this first draft essay. Hey, it would be written. Now it's like they come in with 3 sentences and a lot of questions and just not even though the direction has been provided, they're not able to execute on that direction, whether it's due to poor executive function, poor communication skills, or some combination of both.
Aviva, I'm going to look at some of these questions in the Q&A. We have somebody here who is interested to hear your opinion about whether what you would say, what you personally would say to parents who say every generation of parents think kids are screwed by the latest tech, internet, MTV, cable, radio, swing dancing, goes back forever. Always think this time it's different and that's history overreacting. So what do you say? Social media, is this actually different, actually more dangerous than ragtime or,
My gosh, ragtime, like how is that dangerous? That sounds great, actually. No, I mean, I think that like there's been a lot of research to show that there's an impact on the brain from using smartphones and social media. There's a lot of evidence, and a lot of it is in Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation book about mental health decline since the advent of smartphones. And you didn't see that same kind of dip with television. And he talks about how even with before smartphones, how people were the kids were less trusted, let's say, to like go to the corner store and pick up, let's say, pick up a sandwich or something. That we have less we have more fear around giving our kids independence. And that certainly did start before smartphones, but I think the difference is the highly addictive nature, and also the fact that it's feeding content and kind of refeeding you things that you want. And if that goes on a negative, harmful cycle, that could wind up in, harm or even death. So, and it has. So I think that, unfortunately it is, one of the worst inventions in terms of impact on kids and teens, because it is impacting their mental health. It is impacting their ability to interact. It is impacting their growth and development. And so we as parents have to be cautious. And also, maybe if we also don't let them have the phones, we don't have to worry about the phones, which is also good for our mental health. So we should also think about ourselves when we're making these decisions about if we give our kids access to technology and when we do it. But yeah, I do agree that every generation, I mean, and then AI is a whole other topic. I know that's not the topic for tonight, but that, that is going to present its own set of dangers as far as kind of possible self-enforcing content. And Meta social, the social media, the owner of Facebook and Instagram, they're inventing these AI avatars that are kind of like fake friends for kids, and that is very dangerous. So that's another reason not to have your kid on social media, because they could be like friending these avatars. I don't know how they're programmed, what they're going to say, but it just sounds like a recipe for disaster. And also think about our society in general. Like, we're so much more polarized. We can't talk about political things and ideological differences without it being an identity attack if we have a difference of opinion from somebody else. And I mean, that's a problem on the adult side. So then imagine how that's feeding into our developing kids too, right? So there's so much to this. I wish it was just like TV or ragtime. I mean, ragtime would be the best, of course, but I think it's on a different playing field because of all of the interactive aspects of it, and the fact that it feeds into beliefs that you may have, whether harmful or not.
I'm holding myself not to talk about AI because it's a big passion, generative AI, GPT, Claude, all of that, because it's a big passion of myself and yourself. And I know that for myself, my personal expression has gone down significantly. I rely on it. I do research, and in my world, which is patient, I often print them patient information based on their medical conditions, because we have a software that is HIPAA compliant, GPT Copilot, and I just basically copy paste big notes and I shove it into the system, and I say, now create a patient information telling about it, and I just I look at it, I go over it, but my expression, my ability to write freely and to even think has gone down, because I'm relying more and more as the versions of GPT is getting better, 4.0, 4.1, 3.03. And I'm thinking about the kids who are actually in high school or about to apply to college, the kids that you're dealing with. And my question to you is, specifically with the writing and the vocabulary, how do you think that this, if we don't, hold off or find ways to limit this, how will this affect the brains or the ability of expression of teenagers and college kids?
I think, yeah, it's a great question. There's been some preliminary studies that show that it improves critical thinking, and then other studies that say it doesn't improve critical thinking. So I think the jury's out, but I think, what you said has a lot of validity that, if we're how much thinking do we outsource to AI versus how much do we think for ourselves? And, I think for myself, as I was using AI, I found I was outsourcing a lot of my thinking to it. And then I kind of realized it and I was like, wait, like I need to question what I'm seeing a little bit more. You check the links if there are any sources and things like that. But it's really hard. And I think part of, the, technology literacy is helping people to question what AI says and its value. But again, I think it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, I really see it as an accessibility tool. I see there's so much potential for kids with special needs to benefit from AI assistance, but at the same time, what's the cost, and how will our education system have to change in order to incorporate as well as validate the current educational methods that we have, because where we can pull any answer anytime. And there was an article recently that came out about how, people are cheating their way through college, and probably high school, to be frank. How do we keep the engagement of kids in, K-12 and college when they can pull up any answer anytime? And of course it's going to know more than their teacher or their parent, because it's a technology tool. So that's a whole other conversation. But I think that's sort of like maybe the next conversation could be about AI and its impact, because there's really just so much to unpack there. I want to do it justice.
We can move on to asking another question from the Q&A. So somebody is asking, can you please share your thoughts on what to say to kids to educate them on exercising caution with social media when they get exposure through friends? So, of course, people who are watching this webinar are probably considering signing a pledge to not give their kids smartphones until the end of 8th grade, and probably thinking about holding off on social media. But all their friends have phones and they're all on social media. So there's an ongoing conversation here. You're going to see it. And then, do you listen to your uncomfortable feelings? I'm wondering how you can speak to that. We can do what we can as parents, but really it's about learning with the child about how to navigate it when other people are doing it.
I wish I had more lived experience. My kids are so young. I have not had to have these conversations with them. So I can only speak from my intuition based on my high schoolers and having worked with them. I think just giving them the space to share their feelings about social media, kind of understanding how they're thinking about it, and just going in with an open mind to hear what they have to say, and then trying to give them the structure, and then you can co-create the structure with the child. So something that I talked about in a talk that I did was about a social media contract or a smartphone contract that you could have with your family, where let's say everybody agrees to a certain rules of use. Like, for example, no social media between 6 and 7 when we're having dinner, and phones away by 9, and all the phones are put away in this room, and then they're done for the night or whatever. So whatever works for your family, if you can all commit to certain behaviors. Look, I know, the lines, I don't have great boundaries with my phone all the time. So I know it's hard, but I think as parents, if we can set an example of what those boundaries look like and that we do it along with our children, I think that makes it more palatable for them, because then they're like, you're sacrificing to, like, you have skin in the game. You're not doing one behavior for yourself and expecting something different of them, right? And so if you're telling them not to be on social media, maybe you give up social media for a bit, right? Or who knows? I know that's probably anxiety provoking for a lot of people, but what can you sacrifice to set an example, I would say. So I think that's something I'm going to have to ask myself when I get to that time of, like, what can I sacrifice, or what rules can I set on my own use so that I can be the change that I want to see in my child and not have them do that. I mean, in terms of those conversations, I think that's hard. I think as a parent, you have to assess the relationship with your child and see if, like, should you be the one to have that conversation? Is there another relative or mentor or therapist that would be more equipped or better placed to have those conversations? Because not all of us are good at having those conversations, and that's okay. But, making sure they have somebody to talk to about this, honestly, an adult that they can trust, would be I think would be very helpful for them to figure out how to navigate this. So I always recommend to my high school kids that you find mentors, whether they're like professional, personal. So having kind of like a if you want to call it a tribe of mentors, having different people, bringing different people in their lives, helping them to meet responsible adults who can guide them beyond you, because they may not want to listen to you because they're kids and teens, and some teens are very rebellious. So they're not going to want to listen to you. So if there is somebody that they can talk to that you trust, then that's great. So just making sure they have trusted adults in their lives that are setting good examples for them, and then doing some sacrifice yourself when it gets to that time where you have to have those conversations.
I was just talking with someone today about finding other trusted adults for my kids. So I'm wondering, can you tell me, who are your high schoolers using? Like, who are the mentors? Are they coaches? Are they friends of their parents? Are they like, who are the people that you can find who can play this role for your kids?
That's a great question. What I've seen friends of the parents, I've seen coaches, I've seen teachers play that role. So all kinds of people. And with my company, we do things more formally. We have research mentors, so we help connect kids with professors to do research projects. So that provides them with like kind of an academic mentorship outside of school. But yeah, just having different people in their lives that can, that they could go to is important. Even if it's like an older cousin, or it doesn't have to be somebody who's, the same age as the parents or connected with the parents, but just somebody that they can look to as an aunt or an uncle, older cousin, somebody to provide, wisdom and guidance. But I know it's very hard. We have a very lonely world that we're living in. And I think that's why these after school activities are really important, because that's where I think kids can really meet with adults that they can form relationships with. And I'm not here to preach religion or what religion people should be, but something that Jonathan Haidt talks about in his book is that kids with a religious affiliation of some sort can be a little bit shielded from some of the challenges that we face in this earthly world of technology. So having a religious affiliation can be a great source of support for families, and can be a great place to find trusted adults.
Thank you. That's helpful.
I think I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank everybody all the people who joined us today. And also just to acknowledge that Dr. Beth is also here, and she corrected me that the kids in high school, they didn't feel that, oh, we're mature, we don't need the social media, but retrospectively in their 20s, they feel that it was a good decision to wait. They now realize it. I also wanted to acknowledge that on this group, on this conversation today, we have John Bellis, who he is honestly, in my opinion, from the area of Lower Merion and Mainline, he's the first one who really started, writing about this and texting people and creating connections. And I feel that he's kind of one of the skeleton people for all of this, this movement of Wait Until 8th. And I think, just to summarize, really what we're trying to do in Wait Until 8th, again, it's not anti-technology or anything crazy. We're not a cult. We're not judging people. But what we're really trying to do is to get to the point, or to the situation that my sister came to. My sister is a psychologist, and she doesn't believe and she doesn't like smartphones for kids. And she was trying to reach to parents and give webinars and things of that sort. But when her daughter reached 4th grade, her daughter was the last one without a smartphone. And there was just no way that my sister was able to, push back. And she had to give and that's what we want. We really want to have a community that would allow everybody to live. I don't want my daughter, who's now in 1st grade, to get to 5th grade or 6th grade or 7th grade and to be the only one. And she'll come to me and look in her puppy eyes, and I'll be like, crap, I have no choice, and I'll give it to her. Because we do believe, for example, John in his school, I forget how many, but he has already almost 100 people who signed the pledge, which basically means that they agree not to give smartphones, social media, etc., until 8th grade. And what we noticed, and and John is in touch with Brooke, who is the founder and the CEO of Wait Until 8th. What we have noticed that every month in our schools, we're getting more and more pledges, and we're raising the awareness. For example, on Friday in Kinwood Elementary, there's a picnic, and the Principal Ross, allowed us to have a table, similarly to the table was Wait Until 8th in Gladwin. So our goal, and we welcome all of you to join this on the WhatsApp groups, on Facebook's group. If you think about lectures, or we just want to brainstorm with you to spread the word. And again, it's not a cult. We want people to join us, for us to allow having our children in 3rd grade, 5th grade, 7th grade, and not be the last one not to be with a smartphone. So this pledge is very important for us. And in the chat, you'll see a couple of links, including to the pledge. So it's 9:32, and I think that we could have, just talking about AI and children and generative AI, I think that we can talk for 3 more hours, and there's more Q&A. But I think that at this point, as respect to Aviva and Cora and all of you, we're gonna close out the session. There's gonna be a recording available. I'll send it on the Facebook and the WhatsApp groups, and also everybody who signed in or signed up to this event will get an email with a connection to the recording in case they want to share it with other people. Cora or Aviva, any last minute comments?
Just to say thank you. Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Aviva, for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us.
Thank you all for having me. It was great to connect with you. Look forward to more.
It was fascinating, Aviva. Thank you for all that you're doing. And we're looking for more sessions with you.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.